What's going on, guys? And welcome. Stupid. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. You decide that you want a pet reptile, but you're not sure where to start. Well, this video is going to be talking about what, in my opinion, is the best starter or introductory reptile as far as keeping goes, and that's going to be the Crested Gecko. They are really easy to manage. They are probably one of the most interesting little lizards, just because they look so weird and different. They don't look like a typical lizard. The shape of their head has a crest to it. They're also called eyelash geckos. They're not actually eyelashes. They're not movable like ours. They're just shaped like eyelashes. Before we get started today, I wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who's been watching. Thank you for all the likes, the comments, new subscribers. I really appreciate it. None of this would be possible without you guys watching, so thank you so much for that. The lifespan of a crested gecko in captivity is typically anywhere between 15 and 20 years. They are a nocturnal species, so they are going to be active at night. Adult crested geckos can be anywhere from 8 to 10 inches long, and that includes their tail. In the wild, majority of the time, crested geckos will actually lose their tail, so that cuts off about 3 inches. The enclosure size, because of the small size of the gecko, as well as the fact that these animals like to stay relatively hidden. The size of the enclosures for a baby or a juvenile, you can actually start them out in a 12 by 12 by 18. This will be a taller enclosure rather than a longer enclosure because they are arboreal. They typically stay up in trees and canopies, things like this. And having an enclosure that's taller gives them that verticality rather than floor space, because 99% of the time they will be cling to a wall, cling to a branch, cling to a plant, something like that. They're not going to be on the ground very often. What you can do instead of using a 12 by 12 by 18, you don't have access to a place that sells these reptile enclosures, you can use a 10-gallon aquarium with the sliding top lid, the screen mesh, and turn it up on end. There are some really cool tutorials online about how you can convert that into a front opening enclosure. It provides a sliding door rather than the sliding top with the mesh. This can be relatively difficult, so if you're not really good with your hands, I wouldn't recommend it. Just take a look at the other enclosures. But then when they're adults, you can move them up to a 20-gallon laid up on its side. This works just as well as an 18 by 18 by 24. I do recommend that over using a 20-gallon because it does provide a little bit wider space. You can fill that in with more plants, help them feel a lot more secure. When it comes to diet of crested geckos, they're actually really simple. The best thing to feed a crested gecko is actually a pre-made diet by Repashy, Pangea. Those are the two main ones. There are quite a few others that make crested gecko diet, but those are the two main ones on the market. The crested gecko diet is essentially a powder, and you will take a little scoop and put it in their food dish and then mix it with water, and that's legitimately all they need to eat. You can offer them live bugs like crickets, small dubia roaches, things like that. General rule of thumb with most reptiles, and this is true with crested geckos as well, if you do feed them a bug, make sure that the length of that bug isn't any wider than the top of their head. When in doubt, just go smaller. That's the best way to do it. This way you don't have to worry about impaction or any sort of digestion issues later on. What we will do is we actually ordered some magnetic ledges and magnetic hides from Etsy. I'll be sure to link the shop in the description like I did with the last video. These magnetic ledges give you the perfect cup size for the food and water. You do want to provide them with clean water on a normal basis. Every day you got to change that water out because it's so small. Babies typically eat every day or every evening. You do want to make sure they have a variety. You don't want to always give them the same thing. This is Spoink. You can see he is very tiny. And we named him Spoink for a reason, so I've got to be very careful with him. He does like to jump. You want to make sure you use soft hands whenever you pick these guys up for handling. They are very delicate. They do technically have scales. They're just very small and very soft. They almost feel like velvet, especially when they're smaller. But if you can see the top of his head there, let me see if I can get it. There it goes. You can see the top of his head there. He's got these little crests right at the top that resemble eyelashes. Let me see if I can get the camera to focus. There it goes. But yeah, you can see these little crests up top here. They actually look like little eyelashes, and that's another reason why they are commonly referred to as an eyelash gecko. They have these little feet that they're not suction cups, but they actually have microscopic hairs. There he goes, jumping like crazy. They have microscopic hairs on their toe pads. Let me see if I can show you here. But they have very interesting feet, and they're real grippy. They also have these same grips on the tip of their tail. Their tail is prehensile. You can see him holding on to me there. And at the tip of the tail, they have those same little hairs to attach onto things, just like they do on the tips of their feet. I'm going to go ahead and put him away now. He's okay with handling. He's not the best for sure, but he's gotten better. He actually just shed the other day. He's going to try and jump on the camera. Yeah, we're going to not let that happen. The next thing when it comes to crested geckos is heating, lighting, and humidity. Crested geckos do require a higher humidity than it naturally is occurring in your home. But this is relatively easy to achieve with crested geckos. Essentially, all you have to do is you spritz or mist their cage in the morning, and throughout the day it will dry out. And then when you go to feed them in the evening, you will spritz them again. And whether you feed them every day, like the babies, or when they become juveniles, you feed them every other day, and then when they're adults, they eat every 2 to 3 days. You will have to mist their enclosures unless you get a misting system set up. Misting systems can go upwards of a few $100s for an entire setup. So you can go that route. Those are available. Mist King makes a very good misting system, but it's just as easy to get a little spray bottle like the ones I have back there and just spray them down. Like we talked about in my video with the blue tongue, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with feeding rodents to reptiles. And I can understand that is a jarring experience. And you get a reptile and you're like, oh, I have to feed this mouse or rat to my snake. I don't know how I feel about that. And trust me, nobody enjoys it. But if you're not comfortable feeding rodents to snakes, crested geckos are a great option. Or any of the New Caledonian geckos. They're all great. They're just varied in size and they vary in temperament. This is an example of the food made by Repashy. The great thing about New Caledonian geckos is they all eat this. Whether it's a Chihuahua gecko, a Leachianus, or a crested gecko, they can all eat the same pre-mixed diet. This is one of the bags by Pangea. Let's see if it'll come in focus there. There we go. And you can see that this is actually an insect mix. So if you use this, you don't have to worry about feeding insects. I do still recommend offering it, but it's not a necessity. So another great thing that makes them an easy reptile to take care of. But I was talking about the spray bottles. These are a couple that we have. I don't really use these anymore for anything but the crested gecko food. This is also another good option, just a little pump sprayer. Both of these are made by Thrive. It's actually a PetSmart brand. When it comes to the enclosures, I do recommend the Thrive enclosures. Exoterra makes some. Zoomed also make perfect size enclosures for crested geckos. They can be cohabbed as long as it's females. I never recommend cohabbing reptiles ever. The risk is not worth the, oh, I'm going to see if this works, or, oh, I'm going to save on having to buy 2 enclosures and just put them both together. Don't do that unless you know exactly what you're doing. One downside of this, or one downside of crested geckos, is they're very, very, very difficult to sex until they are a certain size. Spoink, because I don't have a lot of experience in seeing a bunch of smaller crested geckos, I'm still not 100% sure whether he is a male or a female. Same thing with Monkey, and Monkey is much smaller. The reason that I tell everyone to go with a Thrive enclosure, I'll be sure to show you in the video, with the Exoterras and Zoomeds, they use a metal meshing. With the Thrive enclosures, they actually use a flat piece of metal and they punch holes out of it. Because of this, and because of there being more surface area, but there's still ventilation, the Thrive enclosures hold humidity much better, more consistently, and for longer than something like a Zoomed or an Exoterra or a standard terrarium turned up on end. You do want to make sure they have ventilation. Having too high a humidity for too long can give them respiratory infections, and same thing with having it too low. Like we were talking about when misting the enclosure with either of these bottles works fine. I actually use a big sprayer for most of my enclosures. You can find those at most hardware stores. Treat it with the Reptisafe so that you're not spraying chlorinated water. That'll help keep that buildup on the glass off. But another thing that helps out really well with that buildup on the glass cleaner, or terrarium glass cleaner. It doesn't have, well, I guess it does have somewhat of an odor, but it's not very strong. But it is great at cleaning off the deposits on the glass. With the heating and lighting, you do want to provide them a normal day-night cycle. Now, because of the size of the enclosures, this is relatively easy to do with just room lights and just having them turn on and turn off. If you have smart lights like we do, you can actually set them up on a timer through the application that they are set up with. We have Hue lights, makes it super easy, but you can also buy little plug-in timers with the analog circle on it. You press the little things down for when you want it on, when you want it off, and that will also control the lights. They do not require UVB. Now, this does not mean that it's not recommended to give them UVB, because they can benefit from it. But it has been shown that they can live full long lives without UVB, but it is still something that I recommend, and something that most other people will recommend as well, not only for the betterment of the reptile, but also if you decide to do bioactive. So if you want to do live plants inside your crested gecko's terrarium, having UVB will very much help that plant growth. One thing with temperatures with crested geckos, majority of the time crested geckos can be kept at room temperature. You want them to stay in the mid to high 60s to mid 70s. You really just don't want these guys getting above 80 degrees. Once they get above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, they will start to die. And that is something that you need to keep in mind. If your house stays relatively hot during the summer, that means running the AC. When you mist the enclosures, it will actually keep them cooler than the surrounding room. But then during the winter months, as long as it doesn't get into the low 60s, you should be fine. They can just sit in the room, no heating required. If it does get below those temperatures, I would recommend a heat mat or a very light heating bulb. Most light fixtures will get hot. Don't use a standard lighting fixture if you do need to provide supplemental heat. They don't like being held, because they don't. It's a stressful time whenever you handle your animal. They're constantly worried that they're going to be eaten or killed. Obviously, this can be worked on with reptiles. They can get to a point where they are very tolerant of handling. And this can also be said for crested geckos. The smaller you get them and the earlier you start working with them, the better it is as they get older. But you want to make sure that every interaction is a positive one. It is going to throw itself off of you. Inevitably, it will happen. Like I said, light touch, light handling. But from what I've heard, You can find very, very chill babies, and you can find very, very active and springy babies. They do tend to mellow out as they get older, but not much. So if you have a springy baby, you're probably going to have a springy adult. If you've got a chill baby, you're going to have a chill adult. So when you are looking for crested geckos, obviously stay away from chain pet stores. Support your local breeders. Support expos. If you're a part of any reptile Facebook groups, they tend to be pretty easily available. There are lots and lots of morphs of crested geckos. You can find them as cheap as $50 for a normal or a basic looking crested gecko, and you can spend upwards of a couple hundred to even a couple $1,000s for some of the more rare and hard to find morphs. Crested geckos are by far one of the easiest reptiles to care for. Their diet is super simple. Their enclosure size is not very big. You can get PVC enclosures from Animal Plastics, where we get our stacks. I think the one that most people recommend from Animal Plastics is their 24 by 24 by 24, basically cube with sliding glass doors in the front. Now, something that large, you could easily keep 2 in. You could probably keep 3 in. Till 1994, crested geckos were actually thought to be extinct when they were rediscovered in the wild. If you ever wonder, why isn't my crested gecko shedding? Well, it probably is. You just haven't seen it yet. Majority of the time, they will ingest and eat their shed. There's nothing wrong with that. It happens in the wild. It's a normally occurring thing. Don't worry about it. I can't think of a single reptile that I would recommend more to a beginner. Super fun reptiles. Super, super interesting to watch and interact with, especially since they like to fling themselves like flying squirrels from your hand to whatever they see, even if that be the floor. But that finishes things up for today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and like I said, hopefully today is the day that I earn your subscription. The channel is growing, and I'm hoping that we can grow it some more. I'm having some fun with making all these videos. If you guys have a suggestion or a request of what you'd like to see me go over in the next video, please put it in the comments. I would greatly appreciate it. And thank you very, very much for spending a few minutes of your time here with me today. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever I post a video, if the notification system works. And smash that like button for me. Alrighty, guys, today was another day in my reptile room, and I hope you have a good one, and have a great week. See you later.